Hey everybody, welcome to the Dwell Podcast. This is the podcast that is dedicated to inspiring and activating church creatives and leaders. My name is Romeo, and I am here with my friend Nathan Turco. How are you, Nathan?
I'm doing fantastic.
Good.
How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'm ready for another podcast.
We have a good topic today.
We do.
We're going to talk about how to lead in unhealthy seasons or conflict in leadership.
Yeah.
Is what we're going to talk about today.
And it's something I think we all deal with. We're all gonna come up against it at some point. And in our culture right now, I think we get lulled into this idea that everything is going to be perfect all the time. Everything's like on Instagram looks great. You look at the leaders you love, you go, man, it looks like they're not having any conflict with anybody, you know? Yeah. And the expectation of a lack of conflict can really take a leader down because you're expecting everything to be perfect. Right. And then the minute that happens, you go, oh crap. Now what?
You know what's interesting is there's never conflict at the church or ministry that you're watching until you show up. It's kind of crazy how that happens, right?
Yeah, that's true.
As soon as we step onto the scene, all of a sudden we sense all this conflict and we sense.
Why did all this arguing start when I got here?
Is it me? Did I start all of this? Was this great before I got here?
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about a couple different vantage points because we think that that's important. It's going to be great. We're going to put ourselves in different parts of the room around this topic. Yeah. So position number one, point of view number one, what if you have a leader who's leading you who is unhealthy, toxic, or however you want to frame that? They're bringing a high toxicity level to the team or to your volunteer base, to your staff, to your crew, whatever size team you are. We think that this can apply across the board, whether your staff is 2 people or 25. So what do you do if you have a leader who is leading in an unhealthy way? How do we approach that?
I think you have to come to the table first and know your position. And so you're coming to the table going, hey, I've been here for a month or I've been here for 6 years or whatever. And coming to the table going, hey, this is the place that I feel like God's called me to. I know that I'm under a leader who is not the best version of themselves. And now what do I do? I think for me, if I'm coming to the table going, hey, I'm committed here. This is my place. And there's a leader that's operating in unhealth. I think there's 2 things you can do. One, you can really prayerfully talk to the Lord, figure out ways that you can have conversations one-on-one with that leader.
That's good.
And say, hey, I'm noticing this about you.
Right.
Most leaders, even when they're very healthy leaders, they have unhealthy things that they do. So when they have people underneath them that say, hey, I've been noticing this for a while. It seems like it's causing a lot of problems. If the leader's just in a really bad season, they're going to hear that and go, okay, thank you. That's good. I appreciate that.
That's good.
But them receiving it doesn't dictate whether or not you should do it. So like going, okay, I'm just going to do this out of a step of faith. But in front of everybody, it's so important for you to have this posture of submission to that leader. So what you should not do is talk about the thing you should be talking to that leader, but you're not talking to that leader about that thing, and you're just talking about it with everybody else in the back corner. Like that doesn't solve anything. It feels good, feels like you're doing something. You start getting
productive.
It feels productive. You're like, you got a group of people around you. You're like, you know what? I've noticed the same thing.
Right.
You know? And as I've grown in my years of leadership, I've started to realize like even leaders that I don't think are dealing with a certain thing. When I have somebody else tell me like, hey, did you notice that leader does that? I start to go, oh, maybe they do that.
Right.
I didn't really notice that before.
It's
the fruit of gossip. It's the fruit of talking behind the scenes about a leader.
Right.
That is not productive. So it's like anything that comes out of your mouth, it has to be toward that leader first. You got to be honest and say, hey, I'm feeling this, If that leader doesn't receive that, then you're left with this choice of, do I stay here and wait it out, or do I need to go? But waiting it out, I've actually seen a lot of fruit of that. As weird as that sounds, it feels like a non-answer. Like, oh, just wait for it to get better. I know we're like a proactive culture. We're like, hey, let's make this better. But there are times where I've had leaders in my life that have seasons where they're just really unhealthy, and I know it, and I'm praying for them, and I'm just waiting for them to get through whatever they're going through. And 9 times out of 10, I hear their point of view, and they're like, "Oh, I just had this huge thing in my family happen," or "I'm dealing with this thing behind the scenes that nobody has any idea that I'm dealing with." And when your empathy level raises for a leader, you find yourself a little bit more patient to go, I'm going to wait till you kind of get through this ugliness.
Yeah.
And then wait till you get to that healthy side.
No, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Let's take a second and let's go through kind of the step-by-step of what you just said.
Yeah.
And we're just going to take just a little bit of time and we're going to kind of break down some of these things. So like what you said, we start with honesty. We do a bit of self-evaluating, and we realize and recognize that we need to maybe lead up in that moment. But before we do, kind of have to gather ourselves. And you talked about the gossip piece, right? So let's camp on that for a second.
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't even remember who said it to me originally, or if I said it the first. I don't know where this came from, but it's stuck with me for the past lots of years. But it's gossip is not a bonding tool. And how it, right?
Yeah.
Gossip is not a bonding tool.
It feels like it is.
It really feels like the most productive thing in the world. You're like, listen, this leader is a mess. And then the other person's like, I know. And you're like, we are fixing stuff. We are being so productive right now.
Yes, totally.
So gossip is not a bonding tool. Okay. So to start off, so I wrote down some questions that I think that we can ask ourselves as we go into these types of things. So to start off, now after we've been honest, we've decided we need to lead up. We understand that gossip is not a bonding tool. So again, this is all in context of we have a leader that we're underneath that is maybe toxic, unhealthy for whatever reason, right? And we're trying to lead up to this person. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, do I want to be on a healthy team? Do I want to work on a team with people who trust one another and love working together? Do I want to have a healthy leader? Do I want to be trusted by my teammates and by my leader? Inherently, if the answer to any of these questions is no, we need to hit pause and do some self-evaluating all over again. Because
100%,
if you found yourself in a spot where you no longer are working toward the good of the team, your leaders, your church, you may need to take a step back and make sure you're where you're supposed to be. Right?
Yeah, totally.
So if the answer to these questions is yes, then you're back on track. Now ask yourself, what am I doing to support my yes to these questions? And what am I doing to detract from my yes? So first step, schedule the meeting. You got to schedule the meeting with the leader.
Absolutely.
So if you were going into a meeting with a leader that was potentially toxic, maybe you've had some interactions that have been less than great with, how would you go about mentally preparing or physically preparing for that meeting?
I
just
pray
off the cuff
first.
Yeah, pray. Okay, great. That's a great first step.
You got to pray. You got to ask for some insight from the Holy Spirit and go, okay, what is the thing that I need to be saying here? What are the things I need to not say? And that is really, really important. I have developed, after just really working hard at this, a real sense of anytime you say a phrase, especially in those sort of circumstances, there's times where your language could be a little bit less planned, no problem, and I am an off the cuff guy. You've got notes, I don't, that's okay. I like talking off the top of my head. But when I go into a meeting like that, I have notes and I go, I'm going to talk about this, but I'm not going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about this and I'm not going to talk about that. And what you don't talk about is just as important as what you do talk about. So let's say you had an interaction with this leader 3 years ago. And you've already talked about it. And you've already told them, hey, this hurt my feelings or whatever. It's not productive to bring that back up again after you've already discussed it. You don't want this to be a hey, I'm trying to lay out my case. And
how I've kept score.
Yes, how I've kept score. One of the safest things to stay in, and this is again, the filter I run it through. The safest places to stay in is, this is what I've noticed and this is how I feel about it.
That's so good. So
it's not you are a bad leader because you did this and this.
Love that.
Hey, when I had this interaction with you, I felt like this, So feelings conversation, that's a lot safer, that's saying really how good. It affects me. And then I think having a good dose of, there's times in communication where you can't, I don't know how to say it. You can't BS your way through it. So if you don't, So if you don't have empathy toward your leader and you don't actually care about them,
yes,
that's going to come through. As much as you try to manipulate the situation or make your language really great,
right.
If before you get into that room, I don't respect this leader, I don't like this person,
yes,
that will come across in your language. So a lot of like my prayer even going into it is, Lord, give me empathy, help me to be aware of moments where I start to see they're hurting. When they start to explain what's happening behind the scenes, give me some empathy for that,
Yeah.
That makes it so much more of a healthy interaction and less prone to like, hey, now we're shooting off over here, talking about this thing that happened 3 years ago, or I'm impugning your leadership over here based on something. Then you start getting to that place where you're like, I have to justify why I'm saying that. And they're going to go, well, you don't want to get in that territory. Keep it in that kind of, hey, this is how I feel. This is what I've noticed. And I do really care about you and I do love you.
Well, I mean, along the line of the self-assessment piece, one of the things that you said, this idea of going through these steps or going through this conversation, this meeting, this whatever, in order to help your leader grow, right? Because I think it's good for us to hit pause for a second on this on these steps and to recognize that sometimes we do things and we don't realize why we do them. So sometimes, and I've even found myself when I was a younger leader at times when I'm feeling emotional and I feel like I was wronged in some way, going into a meeting like that and almost just hoping the outcome was that leader was going to go away. Right. But we can wrap it in a way where it seems like we're going, we want that person to be healthy. We want them to grow.
Sure. But we know the right words.
We can kind of like put people in some type of prison and not even realize that we're doing it. So I think that there's something to going into those meetings with making sure we do the heart check first to go, am I doing this because I believe this leader has a God-given purpose and destiny and calling and grace. And God, this is God's child and I want to help them be a good leader so that in turn we can have a healthy team. If that's not our posture, and if we don't take the time to pause and recognize that it's not or is our posture, we kind of start off footed.
Oh yeah. You're stumbling around. Yeah. And it's felt whether they can articulate it or not. It's felt when you walk into a room and you're like, I actually just want you to go, and that's why I'm having this conversation. Because you're not looking to make things better. You're just looking to get discuss your list about why they're bad.
Yeah.
But even like for me, it's funny. I have oftentimes there's been multiple times in the last few years, depending on how serious the conversation is. Where I will actually rehearse the conversation out loud in my office.
Brilliant.
So I will actually say the words that I'm thinking of saying. And as it's coming out, I'm a verbal processor. So a lot of times I have to talk and go, ooh, that's good. And
you go, listen, dirtbag. Nope, that's too strong.
Yeah, too strong, crossing out my notes. No, actually saying it out loud helps you to hear it.
Right.
It feels a lot more, you're coming in with a lot less emotion, going, hey, I'm a bit rehearsed on this. That's okay. Well, but it removes a lot of that because you're going to feel the adrenaline. You're going to get in there and your notes are going to look real foggy to you, and then you're going to just plow in. Rehearsing it a little bit is helpful.
Well, we talked about this recently. The idea of asking for permission to speak into something.
Yes.
So in that rehearsal piece, I'm sure what you're discussing or what you're saying right now is that when we go into any type of conflict, if we come in with our gloves up, as opposed to our hands open.
Yes.
How the conversation is going to end and where it's going to kind of navigate is determined by that posture, right?
Yeah, totally.
So that in that rehearsal time, we almost have to go into it going, okay, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, would you allow me to maybe share some observations that I've been seeing?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. Let just for a second, let's talk about that posture.
Yeah.
What would that look like for you?
Well, the very first question you ask, and this is so funny, it seems so basic, but it's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
You walk in and go, hey, is this a good time to chat? A lot of times we're so self-focused. We're like, okay, I'm going to build up this, I'm going to go in there and go talk to this guy. And they may have just had this heartbreaking conversation.
Oh, yeah.
They may have a meeting in 3 minutes that you don't know about.
Right.
And just going, hey, is this a good time to have a conversation just for a little bit? And asking that helps, But for me, it's this constant, like for me, it's the heart check doesn't just happen before, it's happening during.
Yes.
So, and that Holy Spirit leading, like I'm really listening to the Holy Spirit. I'm really paying attention to what's happening. And this is where leaders, again, when you're deficient in like EQ, when you have like no self-awareness and you walk into rooms, you're going to go, oh, this is fine. This is totally fine. And then you're going to make a lot of messes. And years later, and I'm speaking from experience, years later, you're going to look back and go, oh, that was not a good time to go in there. And no, I think that phrase that I used was actually really bad to, and just being able to pause and slow down is really, really important. I've also once or twice in the middle of meetings when I feel like it's starting to slip sideways.
Yes.
Just pause and state something that you feel like is obvious, but maybe you need to come back around. So this just happened this last week. I had a conversation, felt like I started slipping sideways.
Yes.
And I voiced this not as a manipulation, not as like, hey, I'm trying to make you feel better, but I will pause and go, hey, just so you know, I really love and appreciate you as a leader. I think you're amazing. I think you're doing a good job. I think you're traversing all these really hard things, like that kind of pushes back what the enemy wants to come in and bring all this division. And before your voices start raising and you start saying things you regret, it's like, I want to operate in the opposite spirit of that and just go, hey, just so you know, like, and clarifying, going, did you feel like when I said that, that's what, like I pay attention to what they're saying and they start going, oh, that felt like you were saying this about my leadership. And I'll go, oh no, that was not at all what I was saying. Let me clarify that for you, Yeah. So that heart posture, I think going into it is important, but during it is really, really important too. And self-awareness. I mean, I feel after those meetings, I feel mentally exhausted because I'm paying attention to every syllable I'm saying, the tone in which I'm saying everything, because all that stuff matters in those crucial conversations.
No, that's great. I think that one of the so wrapping up that conversation, this hypothetical conversation we're having with the leader that is unhealthy or toxic in some way, right? So we've approached this leader, we've mentally prepped, we've been honest with ourselves, we've self-evaluated, we've asked for permission. Yeah. We've had the conversation. We've redirected when it's felt stressful. Yeah. And then to wrap up that conversation, I think understanding that we need to give our leaders space. Yeah. We need to give people room to recover. Yeah. Right? Because sometimes we don't, and this kind of goes back to the being for your leader, right? Mm-hmm. So I think about like with my kids. If I go in and I correct them, and then 10 minutes later they come out of their room after getting in trouble, right? Yeah. And I still cold shoulder them. Mm-hmm. I'm actually not letting them try to reset. Yeah. So I think that something healthy for us to do and something healthy for us to acknowledge is that no matter what your role or position is on team, we have a role as a leader, no matter what, to be a leader to our leader in those moments and to choose to give them room to grow through that moment, right? Because if we call something out and they acknowledge it and it goes well, then now we need to give them space to course correct, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And finishing it with something like, let me know how I can help you. Like, especially if you start to find out, hey, there's something that's going on behind the scenes. Right. I mean, I think more often than not, I find out that there's something happening in their home life or something like that that's leading to this moment. And you go, hey, let me know how I can help you. That posture of service, it's like, it's vital. That servant leadership, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, it's like you have to keep coming back to that and go, I love you. I'm for you. If you need help, I'm there. You know?
So well, and at the end of that conversation, let's say that goes really well. Fantastic. You won a brother or sister, right? Like just like scripture says. Yeah. Option 2 is it doesn't go well and they don't respond well to it. Yeah. And they dodge it and it doesn't actually go the way that you had hoped. And it just escalates and it blows up and it becomes this new thing. What scripture tells us in Matthew 18 is in those moments if a brother or sister won't listen is then we circle back. We remember that gossip is not a bonding tool, but we circle back with another leader and we go and we have that conversation with someone to mediate now, right? Yeah. And then all the steps are all listed out in Matthew 18, right? Yeah. So then from that point, then you bring in the elders, and at that point you bring in, but all for the goal of winning over a brother or sister, all for their good, not for their kick-outness. Yeah. What a weird way to say that, but not to push them out. Yeah. Right.
Now, I think that's really good. I think when we're approaching our leaders too, we have to be able to sort through how far do we want to go.
Yes.
And we have to sort through, like, is this a sin? Matthew 18. Okay, is this a sin? Is this a stylistic thing that I'm really upset about? Before you start bringing other people in, like, you gotta evaluate, how did that conversation go? Did it highlight anything in me? Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to highlight something in you. Mm-hmm. And those meetings don't always go great. So you can be the best, like the most self-aware person in the world and have the best notes, rehearse all the things, do all the things you and I talk about, and a meeting can still slip sideways on you, no matter what. And you're gonna find yourself in this place where you have to have this ultimate decision where you're going, okay, now what is my next step?
Yes.
And again, not to Jesus juke it, but it's like prayer, Holy Spirit guiding on that, going, hey, I said my piece.
Yep.
He didn't completely receive it. He or she didn't completely receive it. That's okay. I can move on from now. I've let it off my chest, and we'll just kind of see where it goes.
Yes.
Depends on the seriousness of the thing.
Right.
If your leader is cheating on his wife or something, Matthew 18 absolutely comes into play where you're like, we've got to move on this thing.
Yes.
It depends on the seriousness level. 9 times out of 10 for leaders, it's not that high on the serious level.
Right.
It's hey, I didn't love the way this meeting goes. There's a stylistic difference, or I feel like you should be doing this, or this,
Yes.
and you have to, on the backside of it, have to figure that out. And then you and I were talking about too, there's like, what kind of leader are we talking about? So let's say you're in, the worship place. We'll just say, creative arts or something. And you're submitting to a worship pastor, but that worship pastor is submitting to a senior leader. So maybe that worship pastor is not real healthy, not real great. You're trying to work with them, but you see things are slipping. Some of the things that I will pay attention to, like, is the team shrinking? Is it losing vision? There's certain problem signs that at some
staff
point,
morale is off.
So you have conversations with them going, hey, I'm worried about this. Hey, I'm concerned about this.
Right.
That, I think, is the Matthew 18 comes into play, because when that team's starting to get to the point of no return, it's like, okay, I've got to do something.
Right.
So a conversation potentially with the senior leader, which I know is dicey.
Right.
And I know we don't love jumping, the chain of command. Occasionally it does warrant that,
Yes.
At least a conversation, again, open-handed, all the rules we just laid out. But if you're having that sort of difficulty with your senior leader, that's a different thing. Because at some point you have two competing visions. And if you can't say your vision is like 100% biblical and theirs is 100% not biblical, you have a problem.
It's
you
just
have the stylistic opposing opinions.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so vantage point number 2.
Okay, yeah.
What if you find out that you are the unhealthy leader and you've been called to the floor?
Yes.
And you've been called out and you actually recognize, right? So let's just say, that I'm a leader of a team and someone does this. Now they've confronted me. Yeah. They've asked permission. They've sought it out. They've prayed up and they've come in and they've won a brother. And and now I'm in the vantage point of the leader who just found out I need to rebuild trust with my entire team.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh no. How do I even start to traverse that? Right.
Yeah.
And I think obviously right out of the gate, it's prayer. It's spending time with the Holy Spirit. But I think one of the things that's important in all of this is if you've sat through the receiving end of one of these types of meetings we were just explaining, you're already receiving it in some degree if it ended well, right? But I think the next step of it is to actually take action. So a couple practical steps. So let's just discuss through those things. Yeah. I think one of the best first steps, aside from praying, maybe seeking some wisdom with a mentor or another leader, would be to actually schedule one-on-one time with people of your team and sit down and have a conversation and go into that meeting and say, some things have been brought to my attention. Yeah. I acknowledge that I have maybe not responded well in these situations, right? Maybe I've lashed out or I've led in a political or manipulative way, right? Yeah. And acknowledge it and then allow them the space to communicate how that's affected them, right? Yeah. What would be your next step from that point?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think obviously in the meeting there's you have to traverse a lot of temptations as a leader.
Yeah.
So my biggest temptation in a meeting like that is that I overtalk. So I try to hey, I hear you, and I'm gonna come around.
Wow.
Like I overtalk always. I kind of overtalk always, but but in those, I'm trying to like smooth things out, and like I've had a few of those where I had to just go, thank you, you're completely right, and now let me go figure this out. You know, like that hurt a little bit, and I'm just gonna kind of go try to get better here.
Right.
You know, you don't want to make excuses. That will really disarm it. You know, you can share where you're at personally, which again, like when you're confronting a leader and they go, hey, I don't know if you know this, but behind the scenes I'm dealing with this. That is, it's not you making an excuse, but the heart posture as the leader is to bridge connection with the person underneath you, to go, hey, I don't normally tell people this, but I'm going to tell you, this is something that's going on, and I'm so sorry that I did that. And just a little backstory of why maybe I might be a little squirrely right now, or why I might not be my best, you know?
Right.
Honesty is always helpful. Like honesty, self-deprecation, again, not to manipulate, but just go, hey, I totally get it.
Yes.
Because all of us as leaders, we know it's like, we're not anointed because of our perfection or something like that. Like when somebody has a leadership that's given to them, the Lord gave it to a very imperfect vessel, and we're all going to screw up. We're all going to do something unhealthy at some point. Right. So receiving that and going, hey, thank you so much. I expected that at some point because I know I'm not a perfect leader. Right. That heart posture means a lot. Yep. On the backside, if you've deemed that it's true, and you're like, I need to deal with this. I need to work through this. Yeah. Talking to another leader is really helpful, and go, hey, how do I traverse this? Because everything's specific, and absolutely have one-on-ones. Say, hey, this is absolutely something I'm dealing with. But if you want to improve, you've got to know it's like, this is not, like we keep using that phrase, muscle memory. This is not muscle memory for me. Yes. This healthy way of doing this is not normal for me right now, and I'm going to try to traverse this the best I can. Yeah. And you have to start showing change. You have to start going, hey, I'm making change on this. And I a lot of times with leaders, I will communicate as much as I can from my angle of like, hey, give me a little time to work on this too. Like, give me a little bit of grace. Yes. Let me know if I'm still doing this. I'm going to do the best I can here, you know? Right. All of that, again, is just to bridge connection. Like if we're not as leaders trying to bridge connection, if we're looking to break connection, or we're looking to prove that we're right, or we're looking to knock them down a peg and say, hey, you're wrong. Who are you to be speaking to me that way? Those are emotions that leaders feel, and you have to just kind of shove them down and go, no, I'm going to receive, you know? Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I think that I just want to say that if you're a leader and you're in this situation that we're describing right now, you've been confronted.
Watch your language.
If you've been confronted, or maybe you've been on the receiving end of this type of conversation as a leader, and you're finding and realizing, doing some self-assessment and realizing like, man, I'm not healthy. Yeah. Like, well done for acknowledging it. Yeah. Absolutely. It takes a heap of courage to acknowledge when we're not healthy, and acknowledge when we need help, and acknowledge when we need to take a next step. Yeah. And I think a real practical next step, and then we're going to move on to the last vantage point in the room. Yeah. I think a real practical thing, because I just wanted to give this to you, and it's three questions that as you are resetting as a leader, and you're re-earning trust with your team, when you have your one-on-ones with your teams, ask these three questions. When you sit down in your meeting, is there anything I can do to lead you more effectively? Number 2, is there anything I'm not seeing that you'd like me to see? Number 3, what are your goals this week and how can I help you accomplish them? And if as you're regaining trust with your team, if you just focus on those 3 questions, so if you have your weekly one-on-ones, just meeting with team members, that's your 3 questions. Don't overtalk. Yeah. You just listen. You ask the 3 questions. Yeah. Is there anything I can do to lead you more effectively? Is there anything I'm not seeing that you'd like me to see? What are your goals this week and how can I help you accomplish them? It takes courage to do this and to step into this, and to be a leader that acknowledges that you're not perfect. You know, a few weeks back, we talked about leading from vulnerability, and man, it does. It just takes heaps of courage. Yeah. So last vantage point. Yeah. Time to go or time to stay? Yeah. What do you got?
So I think when you're taking inventory, so let's say you're at vantage point number 2 as a leader receiving something like that. Yeah. You have to take some assessment. Hey, where am I at emotionally? Is this like an outpouring of me being like not really having skills as a leader, or do I have marriage problems and I'm just kind of shoving it under the rug? Like, do I not put time into me? Do I not know how to recharge? These are really big questions. Obviously, we could do a whole podcast on
right.
that. But if you come across this thing where you're like, this is not just a minor like skill I need to improve, but there's something real deep going on. There are seasons where it's appropriate to step out as a leader and go, hey, you brought something to my attention, but ultimately that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on in here.
Yes.
And I need to step out and get some health, you know.
Yeah.
If you're in a good team, if you have a good leader, I don't even want to say good. If you're in a healthy place where people where the team can give you that sort of space,
right.
Awesome. If you're not, then you might need to pray about a major life change. You go, hey, maybe I need to go work at Starbucks for a little bit while I kind of get back together.
Right.
On the other side,
vantage point number one
toward your leader. We again have to take some
This is probably the most prevalent.
Yes.
With young leaders or leaders in the church.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was reading a verse to you guys earlier, and this is something that I both love and hate this verse. Okay. Hebrews 13. Obey your leaders and submit to them. We already hate the verse. For they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account.
Yeah.
Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be no advantage to you. They keep watch over your souls. I think if it's easy to shoot at leaders when you haven't been in a place of leadership.
Yes.
It's really easy to like take pot shots at leaders for not doing everything perfect based on what we think they should be doing. When you actually step out and lead, you get so much more empathy for leaders. Like if you're just hanging out in the dark corner, you're hanging out in the back of the bus going, oh, that leader sucks.
Right.
You know, you will never.
You're just backseat driving.
Yeah, you're just backseat driving the whole time. I'm sorry, you're missing out. Like you're never going to really understand what's going on. If you're somebody who's like, I'm going to take a little bit more leadership, I'm going to take some risk, I'm going to try to lead this thing.
Yeah.
The more you do that, the more you have eyes on you in the room where you're like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, or that did not go like I thought it would.
Yes.
Your empathy level for leaders starts to raise, and you go, well, that might be a flaw in their leadership, but also it's really hard what they're trying to do. You know, like that sort of empathy is huge, huge. So if you could get yourself into that place,
right.
I think people leave so quick these days. They are so fast to throw away churches. Like they will change cities for a new job and more money. They'll change cities for whatever reason. Very few people will like stay at a place because of a church,
right?
Which to me is sad because it's one of those foundational bedrock pieces of your life. And if it's not working, that is not a flippant decision. That's a, Lord, are you calling me out of this place?
Right.
The Lord has called me out of places before.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really came up against is I realized my senior leader, this was years ago, I realized my senior leader had a different vision than I did.
Yeah.
And I was emotionally in a really low place. I had been kind of carrying, we had our pastor had left. I had been carrying the whole church for about a year and a half.
Yes.
Then we had a new leader come in. And I realized I'm exhausted.
Yep.
I have nothing left to give. I'm in a church of like 110 people, so there's nobody to like take my place really. And my vision does not line up with the leader. And in that moment, I realized I have to go.
Right.
Because I am setting up this place for a church split, and I don't want that.
Wow.
And though I have friends here, and though this is a complete rewiring of my life, between him and I, it's going to be me. I got to go. You know, like I can't submit to this leader. Submit to your leaders.
Yes.
Is not just this sort of like pretty idea. It's like this is really, you're putting yourself under leadership, trusting that the Lord's put him there. And knowing that it's going to be better for you at the end. I love the end of that verse. It's like, because it will be easy for you. Don't make them go, oh, you know, like if you, and this is where self-awareness is so important. You show up into a room and your leader's like, oh, you know, here comes that person. Like, you don't want to be that kind of person. Like, you don't want your leader to be like,
be a joy to lead.
Be a joy. Yeah. Because it doesn't help you. Yeah. It doesn't help them.
And I think what you're saying is, that when you made the decision, you made that decision from a healthy mindset, which is something we discussed a bit off camera, or earlier when Dalton was recording us and we didn't know he was recording us. But we talked about the idea of making sure that we don't just quit because things are hard. So today, to encourage you, if things are just hard because of stylistic differences, or you want the carpet to be blue but they painted it red, or you want modern worship but they want hymns. stick it out and be encouraged and recognize that verse, right? This is for your good. And don't leave because you're upset. Stay and wait until you're healthy in your mind and in your spirit, and then pray and ask what the Holy Spirit would have you do. Right? So if we take those moments to pause and to just say, I'm not going to emotionally respond, but I'm going to respond out of wisdom, health, sound mind, right? So if the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, all of those should apply to our decision making. All of them. Right. So if we can take a moment to pause and not make an emotional decision, this person offended me, I'm out. Or this person has a different political view than me, I'm out. This person likes vaccines and I don't, I'm out. You know what I mean? Like we got to take a minute to pause, get healthy, pray, and then see what the Holy Spirit would have us do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I had something queued up and my brain just went blank. No, and I know it was so good too.
We're just going to make healthy decisions.
We're going to make
healthy decisions.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, we throw away church for very small reasons right now.
Yes.
And we have to stick it out. There are godly reasons to leave a church. There are. So, and this is what I was going to say. I knew I'd just verbally vamp for a minute and come to me.
Yes. You're the master of that.
Where my mouth starts going and my brain's thinking behind the scenes. No, there's a difference between division in a church and divergency in a church. And this is something that's so important for leaders to understand. So let's say you're a worship pastor. You've been at this church for a long time. You love the senior leader. You've been here for a long time. You've always loved what they're doing. You start to recognize some things that they're doing on a global level that you're like, you know what? I think I would do things differently.
Yes.
This isn't a confrontation to be had with my leader. This isn't a, hey, you know what? You call them life groups. I think they should be called small groups. Like, no, there's like these deep down, like, like these deep down going, man, I don't know. Like, I think I would treat families a little bit different, or I think I would teach on that a little bit different. These are things to be paid attention to because the church is built on divergency. So you start to drift out over here. This doesn't mean you're wrong. It just may mean you need to go plant a church. Like it means you might need to go do something on your own. And before it turns into division, before you start gathering people on your team going, doesn't that leader suck? You need to really take inventory and go, God, are you calling me to plant a church? Because the church is built on very imperfect people branching out, starting churches that are 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Really, like knowing that God's called them to that. And we don't really call that out. And David and I have been talking a lot about it, our leader here, going, when do we notice divergency on our staff? When do we go to that person and go, hey, you know what? We think one day you're going to be a senior pastor. We want to take you under our wing. We know that you're like having a little different philosophy than us, but we want to pour into you so that we could launch you out really well.
So good.
Those are things you have to pay attention to. So sometimes divergency is, it's a beautiful thing. It's what multiplies the church. So pay attention to that. If you're feeling that, like going, I think maybe one day I'm called to plant a church. Well, start praying about that. Start bringing your leader in on it. Going, man, I'm starting to feel this burn to go plant a church, you know.
So last thing, recognizing patterns I think is important. And just last thing I just kind of want to leave us with, and then you can wrap us up if you have any final thoughts, is so the Israelites, when they were traveling through the wilderness, they would take moments, they would pause, they'd build altars. And the reason they would build those altars out of stone is because they were sustaining, they would stay, right? Yeah. They'd stay in place. So whenever they came back through that area, they would see and remember what God had done. Yeah. So I would encourage you, anyone listening to this today, that if you don't journal, if you don't sit down and you don't write and you don't keep track of what God's doing, where he's taking you, how he's moving your spirit, how he's speaking to you, start doing it today. Yeah. Because what you're going to do is, one, you're going to recognize patterns. Yep. So maybe you're a leader that every 2 years you go to a new job. Yeah. And you need to recognize, okay, has God given me a missionary spirit in what I do, or am I just simply stuck in a pattern? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So being able to recognize that. The other part is being able to recognize how much God's grown you, right? So I just want to encourage whoever's listening, for whatever reason, I just felt impressed in my spirit to say that. Let's keep track of what God's doing in our spirit as we develop, because all of these vantage points all come down to how are we responding?
Yeah.
Even when it's about a different leader, how are we responding?
Yeah. And it's really nothing that helps you more in your emotional health than sitting down and taking inventory.
Yes.
And it's something that it's funny. I could look back. I've been journaling for a long time. I have journals back when I was like 19 and I can open them up. And what's beautiful is some of the things I read in there, I'm like, the Lord did that.
Yeah.
Like he did it 12 years later, but he did do that,
right.
you know, like it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then I also read it and cringe a little bit. And I'm like, okay, I was very immature, you know, like that's what I was worried about at that time, you know. But that self-awareness, that emotional health, you can't be a spiritually mature leader and be emotionally immature. Like you have to be able to grow both of those.
Say that 10 more times.
Yeah. And that so emotional, what is the book that you're Emotionally Healthy Spirituality?
Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah. One of the best books I think I've ever read.
Amazing
So
book.
good. When that guy's like, I was a pastor for 22 years, but I was a first-year Christian 22 times in a row. I was like, dang, because he didn't pour into his emotional health, you know?
Right.
So as leaders, that's the thing. It's like all of these things, gasoline on the fire of these problems is poor emotional health. So you're coming to the table weak anyway. This little thing your leader does, you're going to go, I'm going to blow it out of proportion. I got to have a big meeting. But do you? You know, like take some inventory of yourself. You know, make sure you're pouring into yourself and you've got emotional health. So But anyway, that is our podcast for the day. We could talk about that, I think, for another hour.
A long time.
Yes, and maybe we'll come back around. Conflict and Leadership, Part 2. But thank you so much for joining. Make sure to jump on Instagram or at Dwell Worship. We've removed all the vowels because we're super cool. WRSHP. We have some exciting stuff coming up for Dwell that we're not going to talk about quite yet, but just stay tuned. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. But thank you guys so much for joining us. We pray it's a blessing. Until next week.